Okay, I'm Daniel Houghton. I work here at Middlebury College, where I run the Makerspace and teach industrial design. We've had time to make a hydroponic garden with some live data gathering, and this made it pretty darn clear that there is interest and a need for a basic electronics curriculum. So I got the Ben Eater 8-bit breadboard computer and I put it together and found it to be a real joy. But more importantly, I found that there in that journey back into the land of primitive computing were a set of concepts that felt like they might be tremendously useful to anybody interested in computing for their career, their hobby, for fun. I grew up at a time when you could still come across one of these electronics kits at a yard sale, and I remain convinced that there's something profoundly important about touching what we're thinking about, studying it with our hands as well as our minds. And you might be thinking, well, didn't Ben Eater already do this? Why don't I just watch his exquisitely organized YouTube series that walks through the entire process? Well, we are going to do just that, and we're going to acknowledge that that video series was put together a couple years back, and some glitches emerged that got great answers, both on Reddit in a very in-the-moment sort of way, and also in a very organized way by people like Michael Kamprath, who put together this fantastic GitHub of expansions to the 8-bit computer project. And not only expansions, but real fixes to issues that you might encounter when building your own. One of the issues could be something as simple as how the clock module, the very first video of the series, could be totally overwhelming if you've never stuck a wire into a breadboard before. So we're going to take a moment to play and to introduce some of the jargon that is assumed as you begin this journey. And we're going to talk about what might be a reasonable pace in case you don't happen to have all day, every day to devote to this project. I think it's doable in about 3 months by anybody who's willing to give it about 6 to 10 hours a week. And we're going to talk about why. Why should any of us bother to hardwire control logic or an arithmetic logic unit or a 7-segment display? Why should we care about a program counter, a data bus, power distribution, memory addressing, or memory itself? Why should we bother programming machine instructions one dip switch bit at a time? Well, I would argue that when you use your own hands to build your own logical devices, you gain an understanding much deeper than what you had before things got physical. There is nothing more terrifying than the moment the very first module, possibly the simplest one, just doesn't turn on. And there's nothing more humbling than discovering that it was simply because you never connected or knocked loose the power supply. And what a thrill when that really was the problem and the whole thing screams to life. Computers are awesome and they're everywhere and they are profoundly complicated, and it's on each of us to gain and hang on to and develop fundamental understandings of how they operate so that we can hang on for the ride of the next chapter of their development. Next up, we're going to dive right in with the building of the clock, which I think is doable in 1 week if you're given this part-time attention. And if you want to just dive right in and do the whole series with none of this extra voice in your head, fantastic, just do it. Ben Eater put together a beautiful textbook. And if you want a bit of extra encouragement along the way, or some clarification of details, or some recommendations for how you might go about engaging with this textbook, questions like, should I really buy the 8-bit breadboard computer kit? Yikes, it's $299. Well, you could buy your own components, and I did, and it added up to a fair amount. And I only went down this path because I needed to be ready for components that might break as students try out this journey. So if it were just me and I were setting aside the time to do this full build, then I would also set aside the cash to get the parts. It feels like a nice way to be supportive of a totally awesome project. Okay, next up are some recommendations for how to get through the first 5 videos, the building of the clock. Stick around, it's going to be a ton of fun.